The Legacy Superhero Season 3, Episode 3, The Watch's Dark History. What are you talking about? I said. Might not want to be saved? What does that even mean? TW leaned back, a troubled look on his face. The suit, as I said, resembles a living being in the way it acts and behaves. There's a good chance that if you retrieve the original watch, the suit within may not appreciate your help, assuming it believes that it has been wronged by Gregory. Come on, I said. I think you're anthropomorphizing it too much, buddy. It's just a suit, albeit one of alien origin, that can turn you into a literal superhero. I know, said TW with a frown, but it's still dangerous, and I would advise heavy caution if you choose to steal it. Retrieve it. Same difference, said TW with a shrug. You yourself said that you don't have $3,000 lying around with which to purchase it, so... Whatever, I said. You and I agree that the old watch needs to be retrieved before it lands into the hands of anyone who might want to use its powers for evil. Therefore, I need to find some way to swipe it from Mr. Salt without him knowing. TW nodded. That's true, but it is easier said than done, given how we don't know where Mr. Salt even lives. I cracked a smile. That's where you come in, TW. Use your fantastic detective skills to scout the internet for Mr. Salt's information, which you can then give me so I can use it to find out where he lives and where he keeps his stuff. TW hesitated. Does that not count as doxing? That is, the act of releasing someone's private information on the internet? I'm not going to post his social security number and other private information on Twitter like some loser, I said, waving off TW's concern. I'm just going to use it for private purposes. Besides, you don't get to lecture me on the legality of searching his private information when I'm already operating outside the law anyway. If I get busted, what would finding out someone's private information add to my prison sentence? Maybe a few years? TW shrugged again. You make a good point. I'll begin my search, starting with any social media accounts Mr. Salt may have, and moving from there. I doubt it will take me long to do, given how Mr. Salt doesn't strike me as a particularly tech-savvy individual, but it will take time nonetheless. In the meantime, what are you going to do? Go home, I replied, and try to forget about how disastrously my date with Deborah went. Duh. Because I wasn't exactly in a hurry to get home, I took the public bus for a few stops until we got to the one nearest my home, at which point I stepped off the bus and made the rest of the journey home by foot. I was glad for that, because I then ended up next to this weird homeless dude who ranted about how the earth was really flat and our entire government was controlled by a secret cabal of lizard alien people from another dimension who ate babies for breakfast. Admittedly, it was interesting to listen to his ramblings, if only because they were more well thought out than most science fiction and fantasy books I'd read, though I was more than glad to get off the bus as soon as we got to my stop. I didn't listen too much to his ramblings because I was distracted by how terrible my date with Deborah went. Now that I didn't need to worry about that mysterious other watch, I could see just how terribly that first date went. No wonder Deborah was so eager to go home. I had been a pretty awful date, and even Ronnie's pizza place hadn't tasted as good as it normally did. And considering how Deborah didn't say she would call me back, I had a feeling this was the last date I would ever go on with her. Opening the front door of my house, I stepped inside and shouted, "Mom, I'm home. What's for dinner?" There was no response, and I didn't hear anything coming from the kitchen. That worried me at first, because I knew that Icon knew my secret identity, and I worried that they might have come after Mom while I was away. But then I noticed a sticky note attached to the landline next to the shoe rack, which I picked up and raised to read better. Jack, going out with my friends, will be back after dinner. There's chocolate chip cookies in the fridge if you want a snack. Love, Mom. P.S. Hope your date with Deborah went fantastic. You should tell me all about it when you get back." I cringed slightly at the idea of reliving my awful date with Deborah again, but I wasn't surprised. Mom really wanted me to start dating girls for some reason and was always interested whenever I expressed interest in a girl. She'd probably grill me for hours on what we did together and how it went. I figured Mom could make an excellent police interrogator if she ever decided to do that. She may have seemed like a nice housewife, but she always got what she wanted. But the idea of getting chocolate chip cookies pushed all other thoughts out of my head. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a plate of chocolate chip cookies covered with plastic wrap. I partially removed the plastic wrap covering and started snacking down on the cookies. As usual, they tasted wonderful, so good that I briefly forgot all about my terrible date with Deb and focused on how good the cookies were. Unfortunately, my attention was broken when my phone started ringing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw that my best friend, Kyle Deniger, was calling me. That was odd because Kyle had just gone on a week-long vacation to Florida with his family a couple of days ago. I hadn't expected him to call while he was away. Figured he would be too distracted by the fun beach and the pretty girls in bikinis to call me. But I was getting bored without him around, so I answered the call and put my phone against my ear. "Hey, Kyle, what's up?" I said, leaning against the kitchen counter as I chowed down on another chocolate chip cookie. "Hiding from my parents," said Kyle. I tilted my head to the side. Why? They're not trying to make you swim without a shirt on, are they?" "Oh, it's not that," said Kyle in a somewhat embarrassed tone. "It's just that Dad's trying to get me to talk to the girls, and I don't want to." "What's so wrong with that?" I said. "If the girls are hot, then what's the problem?" "Because I'm not trying to get a girlfriend right now," said Kyle in annoyance. "I'm trying to focus on my studies and get good grades so I can go to Harvard like my parents want me to. Dating girls is just a distraction from that right now. And besides, these girls are in Florida, not Texas, and I don't like the idea of long-distance relationships." "Dating might be a distraction, but it's not a really good one if you ask me," I said with a sigh. "Uh-oh," said Kyle. "Your date with Deborah didn't go so well, I take it?" "You're absolutely right," I said. I filled Kyle in on the details of my date. It felt good to have someone to talk to other than TW. It helped me to see just how ridiculous that entire situation was, even if Kyle didn't say very much. I just liked having someone listen to what I said. When I finished telling him my story, Kyle said, "Sorry to hear that, man. You've been crushing on Deborah so hard for so long, but it sounds like you two aren't going on a second date anytime soon." "Or ever," I said. "But yeah, it was a mess, and Deborah didn't seem very interested in going out with me again. I'm not sure if I should try calling her again or not." "Well, do you want to go out with her again?" said Kyle. "I mean, I'm not an expert on relationships and dating or anything like that, but figuring out if you still like her or not seems like an important first step to figuring out what to do next, to me." "I guess I do," I said. "I mean, I still think she's hot, but right now looks alone aren't really doing it for me. Maybe I'll just leave her alone for the rest of the summer and focus on something else." "Yeah, man, that's probably the best response," said Kyle. Anyway, what about that watch that Mr. Salt guy was trying to sell to you? Was it legit or not?" I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should share this information with Kyle, but I decided that Kyle was already deeply involved in my superhero career anyway, so I said, "Yes, it is real, but don't ask me about it. The story behind it is too long to get into right now." "All right," said Kyle. "I'll take your word for it. So what are you going to do about it?" "Going to try to retrieve it somehow," I said. "A weapon like that shouldn't be in the hands of anyone but myself. It's too risky because it could easily end up in the wrong hands, and the last thing I need is for some supervillain or criminal to get their hands on another Trickshot watch." "So you're going to steal it?" said Kyle. "Real heroic move there, bro." "You have $3,000 I can borrow," I said, "because if you do, I promise to pay you back eventually." If I asked my dad for $3,000, he'd just laugh and tell me to come up with better jokes, said Kyle. But still, stealing is just going to make you look even worse to the public than you already do. It's the only option I have at this point, I said. I can't let something like this just float around in public like this. It's too dangerous. If someone like Holes got his hands on it... Holes? Kyle interrupted. Who's that? Oh, I forgot, I said. Foles is a supervillain who fought my grandfather way back when. Wants to get revenge on grandfather for taking him out, though since he doesn't know where grandfather is, he's decided to kill me instead. Crazy, said Kyle. You know, I seem to remember seeing a news article about some supervillain guy in Texas breaking out of prison in my newsfeed, but I didn't pay much attention to it because it didn't seem important, but maybe I should have. Right, I said. Well, I'm just lucky to have survived my fight with that guy. He's pretty crazy. He can create holes on any surface which he can use to travel from spot to spot. He's even got them on his body, which makes it impossible to actually punch him anywhere except in a few very specific spots on his body. That's a cool power, though, you got to admit, said Kyle. If I had superpowers, that's the power I'd want. I'm no good at fighting or anything like that, so being able to redirect my enemy's attacks would be very helpful. It's annoying is what it is, I said in annoyance. But that's my own problem. You don't need to worry about it right now. You should just enjoy your vacation. Okay, said Kyle. Oh, and by the way, I just remembered what I was calling you for. To let me know you're hiding from your parents? No, said Kyle. That isn't what I was calling you about. I was actually calling you about something that happened in Florida recently, near the resort my parents and I are staying at. What happened? I said as I took a bite out of another chocolate chip cookie. It's kind of weird, said Kyle. I was walking along the beach earlier when this guy came up to me. A guy? I said. Someone you know? No, and even weirder, he was fully clothed, unlike everyone else on the beach, said Kyle. Dude wore like a gray t-shirt and jeans, but he was completely bald and maybe even hairless entirely, because he didn't have any hair on his forearms or anything. He actually looked really creepy and out of place, like he was from another universe or something. What did the guy say to you? I said. Told me to give Trickshot a message, said Kyle. I tried to ask him how he knew that I knew you, but he didn't give me a chance to talk. He just told me to deliver you a very important message from his boss, and don't ask me who his boss is either, because he didn't tell me and he ran away as soon as he gave me the message. I frowned. And what is this message he told you to give me? Kyle took a deep breath. He said that you should watch your back and not involve yourself in things that don't concern you. I snorted. What a lame message. But that's not it, said Kyle, or at least not all of it. He told me one last thing before he ran away, which is way more disturbing than a warning to stay out of things that don't concern you. and what would that be? Kyle was silent for a moment, like he was afraid of saying what he was going to say next, but then he finally said, "It said you should watch your next step if you don't want to lose your soul." My soul, I repeated in confusion. Are you sure that's what he said? Positive, said Kyle. It's as weird as it sounds, trust me, but I'm not lying. I'm just repeating to you exactly what he told me, nothing more, nothing less. Weird, I said, and creepy. Did he elaborate on any of that, or... No, said Kyle. Like I said, he ran away as soon as he told me that message, and he just seemed to vanish. I thought I might have been hallucinating him or something, but, that experience was way too real for my mind to make up. Plus, my parents told me they saw him too. It's as creepy as all get out. That's putting it mildly, I said, but thanks for the message. I'll definitely think it over. Well, I hope you figure it out, because I can't, said Kyle. Anyway, I hear Mom is calling me for lunch, so I've got to go. Talk to you later. Bye. Kyle ended the call, and I lowered my phone to my side and looked down at the plate of cookies on the kitchen counter. As much as I loved Mom's homemade chocolate chip cookies, I had to admit that they no longer looked nearly as appetizing as they did before. It seemed like I was getting bad news all the time from every direction, and sadly it was probably going to get worse from here, if that message from the mystery man meant anything. TW, I said, do you have any thoughts on this? TW flashed into existence before me, but of course his form was flashing in and out of existence rapidly. I think that it is very strange, but that you should keep an eye out for any suspicious characters. You never know who may be trying to get you. TW, you look worse than ever, I said. You should probably go back into the watch. You're glitching out like Dad's old desktop. I am fine, Jack, said TW. Hold on a second. TW closed his eyes and put on an expression of pure determination. A couple of seconds later, his form stopped flickering, and he looked as solid as he usually did. My apologies, said TW, opening his eyes again and looking down at his body. It seems that my degradation is getting worse and worse. My memory and personality are intact, but the rest of my form is suffering greatly. I am not sure how much longer I have left. We need to find a way to get this watch fixed, I said, raising the watch and waving it back and forth at him. I don't want you glitching out on me like back during my fight with Alis and Holes. I know, but there's nothing you can do to help me, said TW with a shrug. Gregory built me himself. He could repair me, but, of course, you and I both know that Gregory is not available at the moment, so we can't ask him for help right now. Yeah, but I'm sure I could find someone else to fix you, I said. Maybe I could have Kyle look you over for a while when he and his family get back from vacation. He's a pretty techie guy. I'm sure he would be thrilled to work on an AI like you. Thrilled, maybe, but perhaps not qualified to fix me, said TW. He put his hands on his chest. My AI is too advanced for a high school student like him to repair. Kyle has a higher chance of accidentally deleting my AI entirely rather than fix it. I would rather not put my life into the hands of a high school student, even if it is one you trust. But there's got to be someone who can fix you, I said. I know Rumsfeld isn't exactly Silicon Valley, but a lot of tech guys have been moving to here from California recently because of how cheap it is. Guys who worked for the big tech companies. Maybe one of them would be willing to help. I would not go up to some complete stranger and ask if they would like to mess with a very advanced piece of alien technology, said TW. That would be a great way to accidentally reveal your identity to someone who would probably report it to the police. I sighed and folded my arms across my chest. I wish I knew someone who could help, but I don't know a lot of tech guys other than Kyle. He's really the only one I know who would be willing to help at all. TW hesitated. He looked like he was going to say something, but then thought better of it and kept his mouth shut. But if he thought I didn't notice, he was sorely mistaken. Leaning forward, I said, TW, you looked like you were about to say something. Do you happen to know someone who might be able to repair you? TW tapped the tips of his fingers together, uncertainly. I do, but I'm not sure it would be wise to see him, even though I am fairly certain that the man I am thinking of would have no trouble whatsoever fixing me. Would it be unwise to see him? I said. Is it because he's really far away and it would take a long time to visit him? Not quite, said TW. He isn't particularly far away. He lives in Rumsfeld's city limits. You could take the bus to his apartment if you wanted. He's not hiding or anything like that. Then what is the problem? I said. I ate another cookie and swallowed. Let me put away these cookies and we can go see him right away. I was about to pull the plastic wrap over the cookies again before TW said, the problem is that he hates superheroes. I paused and looked at TW. Hate superheroes? What do you mean? TW folded his arms in front of his chest. Exactly what I said. The man I'm thinking of is no superhero fan, and he especially hates Trickshot. Then why would you bring him up at all? I said. Seems kind of pointless if you ask me. Just popped into my head, said TW. And he didn't always hate superheroes. He helped Gregory several times with tech crimes over the years, but then the two of them had a falling out, and now I'm not sure he would be happy to see you or anyone else wearing the Trickshot costume for that matter. A falling out, I said. What happened between grandfather and this guy? It's a long story, said TW, and you don't really need to know, given how we're not going to see this man in the first place. Hey, I didn't agree to that, I said. If this guy might be able to fix you, then we should at least check him out. You never know, he might change his mind if we ask nicely. You would have to have very good persuasion skills in order to convince him to help you, said TW. As I said, he's not a fan of superheroes or Trickshot. Even if you don't show up in costume, he'll recognize the Trickshot Watch for what it is and refuse to help us. You don't know that for sure, though, I said, and the only other alternative is just waiting for the watch to give out and your AI to become completely inactive. You don't want to die, do you? I guess not, said TW, especially because the threat Gregory spoke of is still yet to come. Then it's settled, I said. You will tell me who this guy is and where he's living, and we'll go and ask him if he wants to fix you. If he says no, we'll just go home and figure out something else. How does that sound? TW looked extremely uncomfortable, but he nodded slowly and said, Very well. I suppose it won't hurt to try, though I doubt it will help either. I smiled. We'll see about that, ZW. We'll see about that. A day later, I walked through the streets of West Rumsfeld, following the directions that TW had given me that, according to him, would take me directly to the apartment of Jim Techno Albert. I rarely ever went to West Rumsfeld. I mostly hung out in East and South Rumsfeld, where my house and my school were, respectively. West Rumsfeld was known for being slightly higher class than the rest of the city, meaning you had to have a lot of money if you wanted to rent or live in one of the various apartments or houses that dotted the place. Dad had built a few houses out here, but he told me that most West Rumsfeldians were not very good people and that most of them were rich, stuck-up jerks. I'd asked TW before I left the house if Jim was also a rich, stuck-up jerk, but TW told me that Jim was one of the poorer people in West Rumsfeld and that the only reason he lived here at all was because he had made some intelligent decisions in the stock market that allowed him to retire early. TW would not tell me how much money Jim had exactly, mostly because TW himself did not know, but based on his comments, it sure sounded to me like Jim was a millionaire of some sort, which made TW's comment about him being one of the poorer people in West Rumsfeld rather questionable. In any case, West Rumsfeld was definitely nicer than East Rumsfeld. The sidewalk I walked upon was so clean that it was practically shiny, while the lampposts that stood at regular intervals looked more like steel watchtowers than normal lampposts. The houses were all bigger and nicer than the ones back in my neighborhood, each one having its own fence and gate to protect its inhabitants from unwanted guests. Even the girls were hotter than the ones back in my neighborhood. I saw a couple of girls my age driving around in a really nice BMW, and they looked more like college students than high school students, though sadly they didn't pay me any attention as they zipped down the street past me. It made me wish I had come here sooner, but I guess there wasn't any way I was supposed to know that all of the hot girls were hiding here. Maybe one of them would make a better girlfriend than Deborah, assuming any of these girls would be interested in dating a low-class male like myself. How much farther do I have to walk until I get to Jim's place, TW? I said in my head as I walked. Not much farther now, said TW. Keep going, and I'll tell you when to stop. I hoped it was soon because, although I wore a light blue t-shirt and gym shorts, the sun was blazing hot today and I was looking forward to entering Jim's undoubtedly air-conditioned apartment. I was sweating like crazy, forcing me to drink a lot of water from my water bottle. I thought this cold water bottle I took from the fridge would be enough to keep me hydrated, but I had underestimated how long I would have to walk from the bus station to Jim's apartment, and was starting to wish that I had chosen to lug an entire gallon of water with me rather than just one bottle. All of a sudden, TW said, "There it is, straight ahead." Raising my head, I saw a large apartment building coming up not too far ahead of me. It was about 3 or 4 stories and looked even fancier than many of the houses I had already walked past. It looked like it was made entirely out of glass, though I knew that it was just covered in windows and that the actual building was made out of more than just glass. Still, it was an impressive sight, one I would have stopped to admire if I hadn't not been on an urgent mission. "That's it?" I said. Looks awfully fancy." "According to the information I found, yes, that's where he should be," said TW. "I don't know if he's actually home or not, though when Gregory knew him, he wasn't exactly much of a socialite, and I doubt he's become more extroverted over the years." I walked through the front door of the apartment building and found myself in a lavish foyer that looked more like the foyer of a bank than the foyer of an apartment building. I made my way up the stairs to the 3rd floor, where Jim's apartment was supposed to be. I didn't take the elevator because it was already in use by the time I tried to use it, and I was in such a hurry that I didn't bother to wait for it to come back down. Besides, the air conditioning of the building's foyer cooled me down a lot, so I didn't find the flight of stairs that imposing to climb. It wasn't long before I found myself in front of the door to apartment 217, which was also Jim's residence, according to TW's research. I would not have known that if I hadn't been looking, because the door was unmarked, save for the numbers 217 etched in it in bright silver lettering. "Here we are," said TW. "Perhaps he should knock and see if he's home." I nodded and knocked a couple of times on the door. I wasn't sure what to expect. If Jim wasn't home, I would have to come back some other time, but if he was home, then I would see if he would be willing to help me. I didn't want to have to come back later, though, because that would mean going back out into the heat, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. All of a sudden, I heard a strangely monotone, almost robotic voice above me say, "State your name and business, kid, or go away." I started and looked up to see a camera above the door pointing down at me. I had not noticed the camera when I approached the door. As a matter of fact, I was pretty sure that there hadn't been a camera there when I got here. Maybe it popped out of the wall or something. "I'm Jack McDonald," I said, "and I'm here to see James Albert. Are you him?" "Maybe," said the camera. "Why do you want to see him?" Was Jim actually referring to himself in 3rd person? Maybe he was crazier than I thought, but I did not say that aloud. "I have something I need to show him," I said. "A piece of tech that I think he can fix." "And what piece of technology would this be?" said the camera. "Do you have it with you?" I looked up and down the hallway again, but it was devoid of people other than myself. Still, I didn't think it would be exactly prudent to just state outright that I had the Trickshot Watch. That would be a good way to reveal my identity, especially if the walls were thin. Looking up at the camera again, I said, "Yeah, but I can't really show it to you. It's kind of a secret." "Ah, secret," said the camera. Despite its monotone, the camera managed to sound skeptical anyway. "Jim can't fix secrets?" My face flushed, but I raised my watch and said, "This. It's my watch. It's not broken, exactly, but it's not working as well as it normally does, and I think that Jim could get it back into proper shape." "Jim isn't a watchmaker, kid," said the camera. "Maybe you should find someone who is. He has more important things to do than fix watches." "But this isn't an ordinary watch," I said. "It's special, different. Jim has worked on it before." "How, exactly? Is this watch of yours special or different from every other watch in the world?" said the camera. "It looks rather ordinary, Not too different from any watch you can find in a department store. Let me guess, this is some kind of dumb prank, right? Prank? I repeated. This isn't a prank at all. I genuinely need it fixed, and Jim is the only one who can do it. Jim is not a watchmaker, said the camera. If you continue to insist on being let in, I will activate the apartment's security systems and send a message to the police reporting a break-in. Trust me, I will do it. I hesitated. I hadn't expected Jim to value his privacy so much. And even worse, I could tell that the camera was entirely serious about this threat. I was tempted to just turn around and go home and forget all about this, but I held my ground and desperately thought of what I could say to convince Jim to let me in. Jim knew my grandfather, I said. Gregory Matthew McDonald. Does that name ring a bell? The camera was silent for a moment, which made me think that the camera might be calling the police after all, but it finally said, yes, Jim did know Gregory McDonald. You're his grandson. Yeah, I said, nodding eagerly. I raised my watch again. And this watch, the Trickshot Watch, belonged to him. Jim knows what it is. And, Jim, I know you're listening in on this conversation, maybe even watching the security footage. Don't try to play dumb. You know exactly what this watch is, whether you'll admit it or not. The camera went silent again. I kept a confident posture, trying not to look afraid or worried. I wasn't lying when I said I thought Jim was watching this entire situation. Maybe he himself wasn't speaking through the camera. It seemed to be some kind of AI, but he was surely aware that I was here and that I wanted to see him. The only question now was whether Jim would be smart and let me in, or if he would follow through with his threat to call the police and force me to leave. I hoped for the former, but the latter seemed very likely to me. Then the camera abruptly said, "All right, the door is unlocked. You can let yourself in, and make sure to close the door behind you so no one will overhear anything we're about to talk about." Then the camera pulled back into the wall above the door, which closed shut. At the same time, I heard a small click as the door unlocked. I could not believe my luck, because I had been sure that Jim was just going to tell me to leave. Maybe Jim wasn't as reclusive as I thought. Shaking my head, I pulled the door open and entered, ready to meet Jim. But what I wasn't ready for was the cyborg sitting in the chair on the other side of the door, and he was aiming a gun directly at my face. Maybe it was a bit of a stretch to call the guy pointing the gun at me a cyborg, but that was the initial thought I had when I saw him. His legs and right arm were completely mechanical, while his left eye had apparently been gouged out at some point and replaced with a glowing red optic that didn't blink, unlike the normal blue eye in his right socket. The cyborg's gun looked more like a laser blaster than a normal gun, but I had no doubt that if he pulled the trigger it would hurt a lot anyway, maybe even kill me outright. The cyborg sat in a chair that looked like a command center of sorts. 2 touchscreens and a dozen buttons were on each arm, but I didn't pay too much attention to my surroundings, because when a cyborg was pointing a laser gun in your face, it was kind of hard to pay attention to anything else. "Close the door," said the cyborg, whose voice sounded almost exactly the same as the camera's voice. "Now, before someone sees." I let go of the door, which closed entirely on its own with an audible and ominous boom that made me think I had just closed the door of a tomb. Given how this cyborg guy was pointing a gun in my face, this might very well be my resting place. "Raise your hands," the cyborg said. "Palms forward, no funny business." I raised my hands, showing him my palms. "I don't have any weapons on me, Mr. Robot." "Cyborg," said the cyborg without hesitation. "I may not be as human as I once was, but I'm not a robot." "Cyborg?" I repeated. "Right. Are you Jim Albert?" The cyborg's facial expression did not change as he said, Jim Albert. Been a long time since I used that name. I prefer Techno now. Though I still use that name for tax and business purposes, the government doesn't treat Techno as a real name for some reason. Oh, I said, I didn't expect you would be a cyborg. I thought you would be an ordinary human. You claim to be Gregory McDonald's grandson, said Techno, as if I hadn't spoken at all. He gestured with his gun at the Trickshot Watch on my wrist. Furthermore, you claim that you have the Trickshot Watch. Those are both strong claims to make, and perhaps foolish too if they're lies. They're both true, I insisted. I'm the grandson of Gregory McDonald, and I do have the Trickshot Watch as well. Which means you're the new Trickshot that everyone has been talking about, said Tecto. Correct? Right, I said, nodding. I can prove it too. Watch. I flipped the face of the watch open and pressed the red button underneath. In seconds, I wore the full Trickshot costume and could feel the costume's power flowing through my form, easily making me stronger than Techno. Techno showed no surprise whatsoever at my transformation. He just nodded once. I believe you. The Trickshot Watch's ability to store the costume as a form of energy like that is unique. No other piece of tech can do that. At least no earthly piece of tech, anyway. I smiled hopefully. Maybe Techno was more reasonable than I thought. So, now that you know I'm telling the truth, maybe you should lower your gun. It would be a lot easier to talk if I didn't have to worry about being shot in the face. Techno released his grip on his gun, which I realized was actually attached to his palm. The gun flipped backwards, folding over itself into his forearm, which opened and closed to let the gun inside. Soon, the gun was gone, and Techno's forearm looked normal again. Or as normal as a cyborg's arm could, anyway. Feel safer now? Yeah, I said, nodding. I do. Well, you shouldn't, said Techno. His chair rotated on the spot, turning its back to me. Because my gun isn't the only way to defend myself if I have to, and it's the least harmful way, too. I looked around the apartment, partly out of paranoia, but I did not see any other guns or weapons that could be used to harm me. I did, however, see that this was no ordinary apartment. It looked more like a combination of apartment, laboratory, and workshop. The floor, walls, and ceiling had been replaced with dull metal paneling that didn't reflect the lights on the ceiling very well, though the light provided enough illumination by which to see. On one half of the apartment was a large desk with a variety of different test tubes and vials full of strange colored liquids scattered about, along with documents and books that seemed to cover really obscure scientific topics. The other half of the apartment was basically one long workbench covered with tools and half-finished tech that I couldn't even identify, either because it wasn't completed or it was so different from anything I'd seen that I had no real reference point for it. There was a door on this side which seemed to lead to Techno's bedroom, but I wondered if this guy even slept. Directly before me was what appeared to be Techno's control center. 2 massive hard drives stood on either side of the desk, connected to 3 different monitors that displayed a bunch of strange numbers and letters that made no sense to me. It looked like he was programming something, but I couldn't tell you what. Kyle might be able to make sense of Techno's stuff, but to me it looked like a bunch of gibberish. I bet even my math teacher would find it confusing, if not outright incomprehensible. The entire apartment smelled very sterile, like Techno had coated everything in antiseptic. You sure went quiet all of a sudden, said Techno, though he didn't look over his shoulder at me. Forget why you are here? I shook my head and said, sorry about that. The reason I came here was because I need your help. Yeah, I know that, said Techno. What do you want me to look at, exactly? The Trickshot Watch, I said. I need you to look at it and fix it. Techno's chair turned around again, but Techno's expression still hadn't changed. Fix it? It suited you up just fine. What needs to be fixed? Does it no longer tell time? No, I said. It's TW, the AI. He's getting old and... TW? Techno repeated. He scowled, the first change in expression I'd seen since I entered his apartment. Let me see him. Now. Before I could say anything, TW flashed into existence next to me, a grim expression on his face. Hello, Techno. Long time no see. Techno also always was completely nonplussed. TW, you look just like Gregory. Any reason why? Because that's the form Jack is most comfortable with, said TW. I suppose I could take one more comfortable for you. No, that won't be necessary, said Techno. But it does make it harder to look at you. Gregory was an eye candy back then, and I see he's still as ugly a son of a gun as he ever was. You haven't asked where he is, though, I said. Aren't you curious to know what happened to my grandfather? No, said Techno, shaking his head. Gregory was a jerk through and through. Like every superhero, he cared more about glory than doing the right thing. Rumsfeld was better off without him. And it would be better off without you playing superhero too, kid. I flushed in embarrassment again. I need your help, said TW. He gestured at his fuzzy body. My programming is starting to degrade. Without your help, my entire existence is at risk of disappearing forever. Good riddance, said Techno indifferently. I imagine you're the one who put the idea to become a superhero in the kid's brain, huh? I didn't put anything in his brain, said TW. Techno's chair swiveled around again. Bored now. Get out of here or I'll disintegrate you with my lasers. And yes, that is legal in Texas. I checked with my lawyer before I had them installed, and it is legal to disintegrate intruders on your property. Isn't the Second Amendment grand? TW looked at me with a look that said, I told you so. But me? I wasn't ready to give up yet. Techno may have been rude and selfish, but I wasn't about to let the only guy in Texas who could help us just turn us away. Listen, Techno, I know you and my grandfather didn't get along that well, but I'm not Gregory, I said. I'm not interested in glory or whatever. I just need some help to have TW fixed up so he can help me continue to defend Rumsfeld. Or should I help? Said Techno. Are you going to pay me? I charge a lot of money for repairing broken or damaged technology. It helps pay the bills, though I haven't done it in a while because my money from the stock market makes me richer than the entire lower half of Rumsfeld's poorest combined. I don't have money. Then I'm not interested, said Techno. He waved a robotic hand from behind his chair dismissively. And don't give me the spiel about the greater good, because I don't believe in it. It's all about justifying your power. That's what that phrase means. I wasn't about to say it was for the greater good, he said. Maybe you need to listen a little better, instead of, accusing me of saying things I haven't said. Don't care, said Techno. And if you don't leave now, I'm going to invoke my Second Amendment rights and disintegrate both of you on the spot. I was getting really annoyed with Techno now and starting to understand why TW had been so hesitant about going to him for help. Then why did you let me in at all if you had no intention of helping me whatsoever? For such a smart guy, you sure are inconsistent. Techno's seat whirled around so fast, I was surprised he didn't fall off. Techno glared at me with such intense hatred that I was sure he was going to start shooting laser beams from his eyes at us. Maybe his disintegration beams would come from his eyes rather than some hidden blaster somewhere in the apartment. But then Techno sat back in his chair and said, Tell me, do you know why I had a falling out with your grandfather, kid? Did TW see fit to tell you that? I glanced at TW, but kept my focus on Techno because I was worried that if I took my eyes off him for too long, he might attack me. No, he didn't. It wasn't important, said TW. I didn't tell him because I didn't need to. Techno laughed, which sounded strangely robotic. Oh, you didn't want to crush the boy's idealization of his old man, did you? I understand. Like I said, Gregory always wanted the glory all for himself. His PR game was on point, given how most people, even to this day, 10 years later, don't know my story. What are you talking about? I said. You're acting like you have some dirt on grandfather. I don't just have dirt on him, boy, said Techno. I have an entire mountain on him, which, if people knew it, would utterly destroy your grandfather's legacy for good. What is it then? I said. Go ahead and tell me. I can handle it. Techno cracked a smile, revealing that several of his teeth had been replaced with metallic teeth that looked sharper than any human tooth. He gestured at himself and said, "The reason I'm a cyborg is because Gregory made me into one, and he did it quite deliberately, too." The end of The Legacy Superhero, Season 3, Episode 3, The Watch's Dark History.